Martin Dillon is an award-winning and best-selling author. During a lengthy career, he has made a major study of our troubles. His books include The Shankill Butchers and The Dirty War. Now comes his latest work, The Sorrow and the Loss. The book contains testimonies of women whose lives were brutally affected by the Troubles. Martin Dillon, why are women's stories not being told the way men's have?
I asked myself this question, over 2 years ago when I decided to write this book. I said to myself, what is the gap? I thought I'll write the last book really about the Troubles. And what should I write? And I thought I've missed something. And what I missed really was to actually reflect the lives of women, how they suffered, and how they're still suffering even decades later. I said to my wife at the time, I'm writing this book and it's not going to be controversial. It's just a straight study of the lives of women during the period of the conflict. And she said, don't be too sure of that, but write it. And I think in many ways I didn't expect that some would be as controversial. Because I think once you delve into that sort of period in history, you're always going to come in, down into sort of narrow passageways, and at the end of them you're going to find the kind of darkness of some aspects of the Troubles.
Women were combatants. Were they viewed as equal combatants?
They weren't. You see, this is the interesting thing, about the IRA particularly, because in loyalism you didn't have the same kind of division, and you didn't have the Cumann, which was the Republican version of the male IRA. The IRA was very misogynistic, It really was. Women were never given really a very important role. They're given the special role. In other words, you carry the weapons, put them at prams, take them somewhere, take them out of dumps, put them back into dumps after we kill people. But really, that was it. Until people came along, or women came along like Mairead Farrell, who was killed in Gibraltar, or the Price sisters, who got involved directly in the conflict, the way the men would have done. Otherwise, women weren't. Women were relegated to a kind of secondary role. In fact, when you look at Mairead Farrell, she's involved in her own hunger strike during the male hunger strike, the famous hunger strike.
Which we knew very little about.
Yeah, we because the IRA didn't care about it. They weren't asking people to focus on it. They wanted all the focus on the maize, right? They didn't want to focus on the women. And she nearly died, right? Mm-hmm. And yet she comes out of that. And what do? A lot of her friends said, look, listen, Mairead, you've done your bit, right? Go to discos, enjoy yourself and whatever. But she ends up in Sinn Féin headquarters talking to foreign journalists who come. And then the IRA comes along and says, we want you for an operation in Gibraltar.
Let me ask you this question. Dealing with competence on loyalist and Republican sides, was there a common denominator between the women?
Not really. On the loyalist side, women weren't involved to the same extent. I've talked to loyalist operators about this, and they said, well, we didn't really have the same division, and we didn't have the same involvement of women. It wasn't as constant, and it wasn't as thorough or as well organized. Because Cumann was a much more organized sort of element. So women were important in terms of providing their support, but they were never given the same kind of role as men. They're really secondary figures. Mairead Farrell felt that. I think she felt in many ways that women were denied the same kind of status within the IRA itself.
How did you come by the assertion that MI5 had tampered with the Enniskillen bomb?
This was because the Irish government sat on a document. And the document was from a British intelligence whistleblower who said that the bomb in Enniskillen had been tampered with so that it would create as much damage as possible, and by killing a lot of innocent people, that it would make the IRA a lot more vulnerable to political pressure and whatever. Now, the Irish government really should have just made that public. You don't sit on something like that. But the one thing about Enniskillen that always bothered me was that there were a lot of people within these terrorist organizations, particularly in the IRA, who were agents of the state, right? Whether it's in the Irish Republic or in Northern Ireland. Why weren't people brought to account for the Enniskillen bomb? It was one of the worst atrocities of the Troubles. Middle of McGurk's Bar, and nothing happened. A lot of this, I was told really, and this is something that disturbed me particularly when I was writing about this, that a lot of files were scrubbed. And I think on both sides of the border, there was very little effort made. For instance, there was another bomb that day that didn't go off. That killed a lot of people. Yes, Tullyholman. And the thing is, the Garda lost the firing package for that bomb. Why? And that's carelessness. But at the same time,
Was it all about blackening the name of the IRA at this point?
well, I think that was this was the whistleblower's view, right? And this whistleblower document was fairly consistent with people being able to say, well, it's credible, but it was buried. Nobody wanted to deal with it. For instance, one of the chapters in the book is about a girl who loses her eye in a bombing in Talbot Street in Dublin, and she called it the accident. So for years it was known to her and other victims at the time as the accident. And I said to myself, how could anyone call something like that an accident?
This was the UVF bomb of 1974.
Yes, yeah, but I think part of it was the Irish government didn't want to address the issue publicly. They knew who was responsible. So when the IRA was blamed for it, they just said, well, just leave it. I think they were worried, the Irish government, and during that whole period, was worried about it all washing over into the Republic. So you had a kind of standoff. And I think they knew some of the stuff that was going on around the border as well.
Did women bring different values to men?
I think had more women been involved, honestly, I think had more women been involved in the politics of the time, or more women actually been involved directly in a lot of these organizations even, right? And had power, I think the dynamics would have changed considerably. When you talk to women about the period, there's a lot more clarity. Even the women who've been living with the horror of it, and some of them with PTSD, they still bring a clarity to it a lot of men don't. And a lot of men actually nowadays don't even want to talk about it. They're very reluctant. Whereas women want to talk about it because they're looking for the truth. They're saying, okay, unpack all of this and tell us what it's all about. But I can't see governments doing that. You don't know what's lying at the bottom of that cavern.
After all these years, was there much new to tell?
I think so, yeah. I mean, one of the things that shocked me was when I dealt with the killing of Jean McConville, which is a very sort of prominent episode of the Troubles. I discovered that there were 3 people standing over her grave that night to shoot her. But there were also 3 other people standing nearby who were grave diggers, and one of them was a Garda informant. Nobody knew that. I didn't even know it until I was writing this book. So there are always things that one of the interesting aspects of the Troubles is when you delve back into it, you don't know what you're going to find. And that's the scary part of it too, and the disturbing part of it.
I just want to return to something that you were saying earlier. If women had been more to the fore than men, might there have been a different result?
I think the war as it was would have ended earlier. I genuinely believe that. I think that women really were sort of placed in a secondary role. They were shunted to one side. But they knew what was going on. They were dealing with the children, they were dealing with the trauma. They were dealing with their own trauma. They were dealing with the trauma that was was impacting their lives because of the war itself, because of the sectarianism, because of the battles with the army. So, but the women weren't sort of asked, look, what do you want? What do you think about this society? What should be done?
What do you think their answer would have been?
I think their answer would have been, let's end this war because it's killing our kids. I genuinely feel that. I do.
Martin Dillon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.